stories coming in from people.
The adopted pigeon is my favorite so far, and the cat meme one, that was quite clever. Also, the person who dislikes spoons.
Disliking spoons. I'm backtracking a bit there.
I mean, I would hate.
Who is that?
I would hate to be on like a going out and then all of a sudden they sit at a formal table and there's spoons everywhere. Holy cow! That might be like they get Tourette's or something. Like, all right, we're leaving. Let's go to like a place where they just serve a thing in a bowl and everybody eats it like communally. No metal, no nothing.
Okay. Yeah. I'll actually stop the timer right now. So I can see some people are also commenting on that, and I think we're almost ready to start in any case. So do that.
Andrea, you must be really hard to. It must be very difficult for you, like at house parties. You have to explain that to people. That's got to be kind of like a potential mood killer.
Oh man, yeah, true.
Hi
everyone.
Holy cow!
Sorry.
How fast were you going, Valentina? Holy cow! Your stationary bike, that must have been like, I need to get all my work. I got to need that 3rd mile in a 30-minute. All right, I'll stop. I'm going to keep on commenting on everything I see.
As you can see, Robert has a lot to say, not just on your stories, but later you'll hear him talking about prototyping. But in any case, guys, welcome to the second ButterMixer. Woohoo! I think a bit of reactions there would be great. And thank you so much for joining. For those of you who joined before, thanks so much for joining again. And for those who's new, thanks so much for joining and trying to see ButterMixer today. We're super glad that you're here, obviously. And like, just to give you a bit of an intro, this fortnightly session is actually all about like getting inspired about different facilitation techniques and different workshop topics. And it's a chance for all of you guys to sort of meet each other, since we're all in the same community who want to build or make workshops a lot more fun, effective, and delightful again. Obviously interactive. And obviously I'm Cheska from Meet Butter. Jacob is also here with me, one of our founders. And we won't go into so much details about Meet Butter because the whole purpose of us being here is obviously to hear about Robert and his experience about prototyping. But just as a bit of intro to that as well, we are a platform which is designed to make online workshops more interactive and delightful again. And our whole intent is to actually empower facilitators to make their workshops or virtual workshops a lot more valuable, or at least at par with physical and live ones. So that's the whole intent, and we're still building heavily and leaning into the product. But we'd love to hear a lot of insights coming from you guys on how we can improve this whole experience for you. Okay, but enough about that. I think I'll go into the main thing, which is to obviously introduce Robert. So he's, as you guys all know, he's the owner of Dallas Design Sprints, and he's the organizer for the Global Virtual Design Sprint. And he's here to talk about prototyping and share with us his experience on it, like what are the challenges he's faced when it comes to the methodology, and obviously the opportunities that we can all learn from and his insights. And yeah, that's mostly it. Like, take it away, Robert.
Right. So hello, everyone. I think I've reached out to a lot of you on LinkedIn. So you're kind of figuring out that I'm, here rather than on LinkedIn. But if you want to know more about me, like Cheska's saying, she gave a great introduction. Just look me up on LinkedIn. It's Robert Skrobe. It's got everything you need to know about me, and then we can have a conversation about anything you like. So thank you all for taking the time out to come to this. If you are here, and you're active, make sure that your microphones are muted when you come in, so that there's any background noise might kind of not distract from what's going on. Cheska, if I'm going to share my screen, I just basically do the present button and then just choose what I want to show, right? Okay, let me go ahead and do that. Give me a minute. My computer's slowly chugging away. All right. Okay, so this morning, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Can everyone see something that says Meet ButterMixer, all about prototyping? By the way, say that 5 times fast, like I did last night, trying to entertain myself. Let's see. There's the full screen. I'm going to go out a little. So I'm just going to give an overview of everything that we're going to be doing today. So the first part of this is going to be my own story in terms of how I kind of came around with pretotyping along with very badly drawn images. We'll get into the history of pretotyping a little bit. For those of you, it may be a kind of a run through of what you already know, but for people that are new to it, it's basically a primer on what it's all about. Then we're going to go into variations. So beyond the actual application of pretotyping, there's a couple of combinations that I've done with the methodology, and also a couple of examples of how the methodology has been used by other people in different places. And then finally, I have an exercise for those of you who are interested in kind of walking through this, where it's going to go through a hybrid process of design thinking and prototyping, so you can get your own kind of experience right here in this session of what it's all about. But this is all optional, so I'll include the link later on if you're interested. But for now, I'll kind of do a walkthrough so you can sit back and relax.
Hi.
As I tell a story a little bit about how I came to kind of come across prototyping last year. So, Cheska, do you want me to share out the URL so that people can kind of go at their own pace, or would you rather I kind of wait till we get to the exercise?
I think after the exercise would be better.
Okay, sounds good. Right. So if you have any questions or anything comes up, I do believe that you can put those in the chat. Correct, Cheska, or is there a special place you want people to put the Q&A?
Questions would be great. Yeah, in the chat.
All right. Just put them in the chat, and then we'll get to them during the breaks that we have. But anything and everything is fine. I don't mind answering questions one bit. In fact, that's the thing I look forward to the most. So, full disclosure, I drew all these images. These were not my son's, as I could probably kind of lay it off to him. But I thought this would be a kind of a different way of kind of showing my history with prototyping in a way that's a bit more engaging than just kind of trying to digitally do it with a bunch of stock photos. So if you have any criticisms, please send them my way. I am trying to improve, since I haven't drawn like this since the second grade. So I'm, as Cheska was saying, I manage and organize the Global Virtual Design Sprint. It is an event that happens twice a year, and the sole purpose of it is to give professionals who have never heard of virtual design sprinting or design sprints the chance to practice it in an environment with an international team of people. But the underlying premise of it, or the mission, is to showcase people in their best professional selves and to promote them as such. A couple of people that are on the call, and I won't call them out, but are here and can attest to it. But I put my sole focus on that when it comes to doing this event. So we just came, the one that was just done, I think it was last year in about April or May, right around the height of the pandemic, when people were all kind of coming into the virtual space. So everyone was kind of like getting their particular design sprint teams wound down. The teams had some incredible ideas. These are some of the ones that stick out for me. Like somebody had proposed a hydro park. Another team that was really well knit talked about augmented reality and teaching, so that you could do it virtually, where it combined augmented reality and what humans could interact with on an app, as well as mindful eating, which were cards that you would put on a dinner table, so that while people were could potentially think about what they were going to do for dinner, they could use these cards for not only nutritional reference, but also to say, like, do you know where this food's sourced from? Do you know, like, its history of it, so that it's educational as well as what you can enjoy about the food. But the problem is that with all these ideas that came of the virtual design sprints, there was too many distractions. I mean, once they got done with the event, there were commitments. There were people like, I don't know what that is. That doesn't look like a dog at all. I tried putting a whole bunch of like pencil marks on it, but it really looked like a half dog, half monkey. Anyway, but the point is that, you know, you have your family, you have your outside commitments that kind of come into the mix. So once you made the commitment with the event and you're done, you're usually done with whatever you worked on. But the teams also knew that for saying like the hydro park, it was going to be a far cry to actually see if it would work in the market. You know, most of the ideas were good to kind of explore, and people really enjoyed their time together. But there were some teams that were really enthusiastic about the ideas they came up with, but they had no way of executing on them, and they really didn't know if they were going to work in the first place. So as an organizer, that kind of left me in a quandary, because this is something that I know that's going to be one of those after event feelings or dynamics that has been persistent since I had done 5 of them at that point. So I was trying to think of alternatives, and I was thinking for weeks. I was like, okay, do I stick with process? Do I do sponsored challenges? Do I do open innovation challenges, which is what we're trying a bit more this time around? And you can see there's other thoughts that usually go into my head around that time. Although I will say that I haven't had a donut in years, so I don't know why I put it there. I guess it was just looking for space. So around about 4 weeks after the event was done, I'm in the DMV, which is the Department of Motorized Vehicles here in Dallas, and I'm getting my license plates renewed. And I don't know why I have a mohawk. I really can't tell you, but this is a rendering of, I guess, my self kind of drawing, I guess. And by the way, this person was actually real. There was a very large person with green hair, and he wasn't drooling, but he really didn't take a shower that morning. He was clearly somebody that just walked into the DMV and had to get something done, and was playing his music so loud that you could hear it even if he was like on another part of the area. And this is when people were still standing in line. This is probably before all the pandemic like protocols came into view. But as I was in line, I basically watched a video that somebody had forwarded me about pretotyping. Now, this guy named Alberto Savoia had been kind of doing it for a while. It was about a decade old since he had started it, but this was kind of a culmination of what he had done so far. And he was explaining what the process was about how you're basically going after data rather than opinions, how you're testing the market for ideas before you're actually thinking about your idea and trying it out in something like a design sprint. This was pretty much a direct reach to your audience in the market to see if they would buy your thing in the first place. So basically to purchase it or sign up with an email address or to give you a phone number or some sort of skin in the game. So when I saw that and I started putting 2 and 2 together, I don't know if my head blew up from my forehead, but the idea is that I started asking questions of possibilities, seeing what if I could pretotype to test the ideas before a design sprint? Like, could I potentially teach teams that they could do these small micro experiments to validate or invalidate their assumptions around their ideas? And while they're in a design sprint, could I go from a solution sketch straight to an hypothesis to see how it would be used? So once they have a novel approach, say they went through a regular design process, could they leap off from there and really test the market without asking 5 people their opinions? And that kind of came to the conclusion. It's like, could we combine these two to make real products and services? So the outcomes of these sessions in the Global Virtual Design Sprint can be actual products and services in the market if there are 1 or 2 individuals on the team that want to continue on with it. That has happened irregardless of pretotyping in some instances with the GVDS. But if I had a mechanism to reinforce that, that was the idea with this. So that's the story I have with how I came to kind of understand pretotyping. And this next section here, I'll kind of go into the bit of history. So I won't go word by word, but I'll kind of leave it up on the screen a little while I'm going over the highlights. And again, you'll be able to see this later on once the link's shared. But basically, pretotyping in a very simple sense is what I mentioned before. It's micro experiments to test hypothesis. It really uses the scientific method as its core to evaluate whether or not an idea has merit, like if whether it's going to be successful in the market. And as I mentioned, it was kind of refined and developed around 2009, 2010. I'll zoom in on Alberto Savoia so you can kind of see what he looks like, and how he kind of came up with the term. And this is taken from his book, The Right Ed, which I'll get into a little bit later on. But essentially, he wanted to try to see if he could test something before he even went to a prototype, before he went to an MVP or anything like that. Something where he could kind of explore the ideas that he was thinking about with products in a very simple and fast way, so that you can see whether or not people will give what he calls skin in the game, or some sort of financial or intention commerce, something to kind of say that this is what they want to invest in. And this is a bit of history. Basically, he put out a free PDF that was translated into multiple languages fairly fast over the course of a couple of years as it began to spread in terms of his ideas. Then he started doing a bit more in terms of iteration at Stanford, teaming up with various people in the creative and educational spaces. And then Richard Cox Braden was the person he kind of paired up with at Stanford to kind of do a bit more with seminars and workshops. And I'm including a PDF here, which you can search online, but this essentially comes for the book as well. These are all the different types of pretotypes that they recognized in the wild that corresponded to their theory around testing way in advance. The one that's more popular than most is the one where Jeff Hawkins, for the Palm Pilot, carried around a wooden block that would essentially be the same kind of example that he wanted to do for his product. He would literally use it as he would normally use the Palm Pilot if it was real. But this was a way for him to understand how does it fit in his pocket, what would he reach for in terms of getting information. And he used that as kind of like the foundational basis for how he would start crafting and creating the Palm Pilot in a digital form and like it be with an actual device. And again, this is all online, but it will also be available in this presentation when you see it later. Fast forward to today and where we are with the process is that this is the book, The Right It. It basically is a culmination of everything that you've read or that you've seen previously in terms of the history. The one thing, if you can't find the book, it's not in the library, you don't want to buy it right off. There's a video companion site that Alberto does that essentially explains all the tenets in the book and the theory and the rationale behind it, as well as some updated videos around how you get to certain I was going to say theories, but no, it's certain equations when it comes to success. All that's covered on the video side. And again, I have links for that later on. But this is where it is right now. It's fairly actively discussed. And I also wanted to give my own opinion about pretotyping, so it wasn't just an informational. So after having done this for a little less than a year, I will tell you that this isn't for everyone, primarily because pretotyping tends to fit a certain type of individual, ones that tend to be more risk averse, they're tolerant of micro failures, they're less interested in opinions and consensus building and really want to know what the market thinks. So it doesn't mean that you can't do pretotyping if you're not leaning towards this. I'm just saying that it's easier for people that have these dispositions to kind of engage the process. There are multiple phases to pretotyping. So the book goes into how you do your initial engagement with the market. But if you want your pretotype to actually start evolving into a real product, it takes time. So it's going to be where you have your first 10% that tells that we have a success rate of 10%. If you have something that goes over that, normally you don't straight try to develop the product. You start improving it incrementally, bit by bit, to see how the market continues to consume it or engage it so that it provides more rationale, more of your own data, or Yoda as he calls it, to validate whether or not you're going in the right direction. I've also discovered, after kind of getting involved with this a bit in the beginning of the year, that pretotypes are not just for sales. So there are different types of pretotypes. The ones that are promoted in the Right It are sales or transactional ones. But there's also pretotypes that go into testing features, where if there's an existing customer that wants to opt in, say they're already part of an organization, they already have like a membership. These bits of their membership that can be opted into, like new features, can be something where you can take analytics and see if they actually click I agree or I click I want this. Then you have that as a particular pretotype, depending on how you're selling to those individuals. And also, we've been exploring on the side, I know a couple of people have, about developing new habits and changing what you do, and they're called lifestyle pretotypes. Their measurements are a bit different, but we have an example at the end of this presentation that kind of goes into that. No matter what you do in terms of experiments with pretotypes, they tend to have champions, somebody in the background that kind of either gives you cover in an enterprise to kind of do these experiments, or there's somebody that is intrinsically motivated by the pretotype to see it to conclusion, or to see it to have some modicum of success. So it's maybe a pretotype can just be built for educational purposes, which is fantastic. But the ones that tend to stick over time tend to have one or two people, or even three people, that advocate for it, that see the vision in it, that maybe they have their own skin in the game intrinsically. But chances are, if it's going to live beyond the initial failures that inevitably pretotypes are going to engage, then they're going to have some people that are going to back it up over the rougher part of the beginning process of exploring it. Pretotyping definitely requires patience. So I wouldn't want anyone to get the impression that pretotyping is like a fast track to getting something that works in the market. like anything else, it takes time, both in understanding what people want as well as how you want to communicate what you're offering. And for some experiments, they need more than the allotted 24 to 48 hours in the market. Sometimes they need a bit longer, but usually you have to allocate a bit of time when it comes to the actual engagement of the prototype, not necessarily the build. And there's also something I discovered is that prototypes are kind of marketed as being fast and cheap. Like the faster you can get something in front of somebody, the quicker you can get a reaction to. But I also found that there's a dynamic of believability, and that comes also from design sprints, where they talk about the Goldilocks effect. Not too involved, but not too like uninvolved. So like just the right amount of detail and kind of graphics or engagement that will make someone believe that this is a real thing, like a real product. But on the back end, there's not a lot to it. It's really a facade. But the idea is that you're kind of giving your prototype the chance to be consumed in a way that says, okay, this is somewhat legit, rather than having it just being what you saw before, which was a lot of drawings like I did. I don't know if that would convince people about product, but it would certainly go into the conversation about where it could go. Now, outside of this, there are a number of sites you can go to for learning about prototyping. I had mentioned the book. There's also the Stanford seminar that I saw while I was waiting. The DMV is linked here. The video lessons I mentioned before. There's also a website called pretotyping.org, which summarizes a lot of what I've said here and gives you a lot of different points around initial level of interest and so on, like some of the precursors of what you need to understand about prototyping. And there's also someone that Jeremy Clark back in 2012 put out something called Pretotyping at Work, which was forwarded to me by Americo Alves. And it's really, really good at understanding how prototyping blends with different work environments and different work situations. There's been interviews and reviews with Alberto if you want to get into that. I interviewed him directly for a show we did last year with Sandy Lamb called Remotely Interesting. There's also some things he's done for, I think it was VMware, and there's another one where it's a podcast. But there's plenty to go out there if you want to find out more about Alberto beyond what's been published. There are spots that are starting to pop up for community. Full disclosure, I'm the person that's been kind of creating some of these, such as the GVDS community of practice on Slack has its own prototyping channel. There's a Pretotyping Professionals group on LinkedIn that I post to. I just posted something a couple of days ago about a prototyping challenge, a monthly challenge, where if you've never done prototyping or you're actively involved with prototyping, the idea is that you're going to do at least one experiment per month, so that you can test out something you're interested in exploring more of, but it's done through kind of like a community effort. So you'll have like a handful of different people that are going to try doing an experiment with a market engagement hypothesis and an XYZ, a market engagement hypothesis and an XYZ hypothesis, and sharing that with others to get perspectives, making sure they're crafted properly, maybe get some pointers on how to create your experiment. All of that's going to go down in not only the Pretotyping Professionals group on LinkedIn, but also the Exponentially is hosting a prototyping channel on Slack, which is where we're directing most people for the challenge. Also, if you're a fan of Facebook, I just started a Pretotyping Professionals there as well. So if you want to start conversations about anything related to the practice, those are good places to start. The last thing I'll go over before we kind of get into a little bit of Q&A and some, it's less of me talking because I have a 5-minute threshold usually of people and they start going, okay, we're done. But variations, it's good to kind of point out that prototyping has been around for a while, but also for people like me who like to tweak things, I like taking what's there and seeing how I can improve it. That's just something that I usually do with every process that I come across. So when I looked at prototyping and design sprints, there were two major things that I saw could basically go with. And by the way, if you're not familiar with design sprints, really good quick primer. It's basically a practice where you can go from initial concept or idea all the way to a testable prototype in about a week's time. And there's been a couple of books that have been published about it. The most prominent one being Jake Knapp's book, just called Sprint. Also, I believe it's Richard Banfield also did one called Design Sprint, which is a bit more holistic, but you can go look those up and they'll give you more information on what design sprints are. So when I say that, if you've never heard of it before, sorry, I don't mean to lose you, but there is information out there. you can do a search for 90-second design sprint, and it'll give a quick overview of Jake Knapp's version of it. So anyway, combining prototyping and design sprints, there's really two key components. Is that first, you prototype your idea first. So you're going to get some rationale from the market in terms of what exactly people are going to do. So you basically go through a standard prototyping process here to maybe do a little bit of initial ideas and do some design thinking in the beginning. Then you take the rationale in terms of what's successful, and you fashion it in the first part of a design sprint. Then once you get to the sticky decision part, like I mentioned before, you get stakeholder approval if you're in an enterprise or an organization to basically go forward with testing in the market this particular idea that the team's come up with. And you do exactly the same thing you did in the beginning, is that you just kind of follow through, figure out whether or not people are going to engage or not, and then do a go or no-go call for the second phase. This particular one has been used by a couple of teams that I'm aware of. It blends the best of both processes. It validates market interest before a design sprint happens. It also identifies potential customers. So if you get them involved with early and often with what you're doing, they tend to be someone that those. All right, stop for a second. For people that you engage in the first part of your prototyping, they tend to be resources for you when they come back with the second prototype to give you a before and after how they react to it. But your ultimate North Star is going to be all about your market data that you get from both of these particular efforts, both pre and post. And there are some cons in there, specifically with long-term golden sprint questions. We've tried to include them in this process before, but they tend to sometimes get lost when it comes to the actual testing, and they're more placeholder. But you can find inspiration in those particular data points to continue to make sure that this second prototype aligns with that. Now, the other variation that I've done is with design thinking, and this is something that I'm doing for my own business called The Dash. And essentially, the notion is that it emerges some of the tenets of design thinking with prototyping in a way where the first part of it is to understand both your idea and the audience and how they're linked together, and then get into the actual method of prototyping. So you're aware that this is not just a process. I've been actively selling this since like December, and it's gone through three client engagements so far. And the thing that I've been able to glean from it, and you're seeing kind of like the 14th rendering of this, because last year I had a group of people that were very gracious enough to help me kind of explore this. And this used to be much more involved, a lot more activities. This has been pared down to its extreme degree, and it's been made modular so that if a company or a client already has an idea or they know who their audience is, they segmented it, they have the locale, then 1 and 2 may not be necessarily needed, and you can just go into this, which is teaching people about how to do the prototyping process. But I digress. After doing about 3 or 4, the fourth one's going to be coming up next week, where the client engagement, the 3 previous ones that I've sold this to, they really appreciate the fact that it's only 2 to 3 days, that it works with existing software and process, it's scalable. What I appreciate about the prototyping process is that it's you can change it enough so that you can kind of add on these extra processes to it to make it that much more better. So that's why my thought is that it needed a little bit of design in the beginning up front to really be able to make prototyping work. So that was the whole concept around this particular approach. Although this particular one does require some certain skill sets, people that are familiar with analytics, people who are familiar with growth design. If you want your prototypes to be very advanced, if you want them to segment, sometimes people, when they first encounter this, don't know how to do hypothesis writing. So there's a little bit of training that goes into it. But for more often than not, usually when we start this after day 1, people are already off to the races and they know what they want to do. Real briefly, there's 2 particular methods in the wild that I saw that were very similar to prototyping that kind of align with it, and they're both called HDD. I don't know why, but they both kind of use the same nomenclature. So they're hypothesis driven. They're just come from development or design, and the idea is that they use the same kind of approach to look at the ideas, or in this case for development, questions and assumptions that correspond to particular things that they want to do with their project. Go through and develop some hypothesis, do an experiment, learn from what works, and then actually implement the product. Or this is kind of execution, but there's more of a loop here. And it's the same with this. In terms of the design, they, instead of kind of going just with hypothesis and testing out what works, this approach for that I've seen kind of gets into a bit of an emphasis on research, which is kind of counterproductive to prototyping because it doesn't really need opinions. But it does align very well with jobs to be done, user stories, and agile. But all at its core, it's about kind of speculating on what the market or what their audience is going to do, and then doing research on that to see if it validates some of the assumptions before they go into design and development for particular products and services. And that is it for me talking for how long? A straight 30 minutes? Holy cow. I hope everyone's still here, because that would be painful for some. But hopefully this was informative, somewhat educational, and somewhat entertaining, I should say. If you do have any questions, please put them into the Meet Butter chat, and we can get to those. And Cheska, and am I missing anything? Did I skip over anything through all this?
No, actually, a lot of questions were coming in, and so thank you so much for sharing that. It was a quick. I think you actually took a lot less than 30 minutes. I was expecting it to be a bit longer, given how much you were going to touch on. But it was a great intro into prototyping, and I love that you also went into the history and sort of the differences with the different types of methodologies. So that's awesome. But I think now, more importantly, a lot of people have questions. So let's move on to that. Guys, if you do want to verbally say your question, just feel free to use the hands up, much like Jacob just did right now, so that you can actually get into the queue. But to start off, the hands up icon should be in the bottom bar if you see it. I think to start off, the first question was actually coming from Viola. It's like, how do you choose what Pretotype and when you have research? What Pretotype to do when you have researched several pain points and detected multiple potential problem solution fits without an existing product? So I think we can start off with that question first.
So how do you choose which one to do? Can read the question one more time, because I'm going to try to document it here as well on the screen. Say it one more time.
How do you choose? How do you choose what to Pretotype when you have researched several pain points and detected multiple potential problem solution fits without an existing product?
You speak very fast, Cheska.
And also with a Filipino accent, so it might make it very difficult.
I'm not gonna paraphrase it just right. I should probably go into the chat and copy and paste.
But I think that might be easier.
Okay,
but did you get that question, or? I
think so. If you're seeing it up on the screen, I'm trying to share it. It's just I think when I went full screen, I kind of knocked out anything I was seeing with Meet Butter. So how do you choose what the prototype is when you okay, so it comes down to two decision points. One is which of the possible prototypes that you're going to do match well with either yours or your team's skill set. What do you see your team being able to execute against? I'll make an example. So if you've done some research on pain points without an existing product, and you know what people are kind of either struggling with, you're going to kind of start thinking about some market engagement hypothesis. So they're going to be fuzzy and vague in terms of what the possibilities could be. When you kind of look at all those different possibilities, usually you can do something as simple as dot voting and see which ones seem to appeal to the group in terms of where you could go with things, especially if you want to create some experiments against that. But that would be my instinct in terms of going in that direction. So if the existing product is not there, there is no existing product, but you have plenty of data and information about your audience and where they're struggling, or where there's some pain points, or where they're not getting to where they need to go, and whatever their situation is. It starts out with that market engagement hypothesis, like, if in this particular situation, this person would probably do this to achieve this. And I'm glossing over it at a very high level, but that essentially that essentially is the starting point where you think about some possibilities for that audience. And then as a team, or even if you're just doing it on your own, you kind of pick the one that you feel like you can execute better. Like say if it's a digital, it may have a digital engagement in terms of online versus in person, and you're a shop that basically does more digital work, then that could lead you in that direction. Hopefully that answered that question, because I don't, between you saying it and me writing it, I probably didn't serve it justice. So follow up in the Q&A if I didn't answer that correctly.
Yeah. I think Viola is putting her thumbs up, so I think it adequately answered it.
Okay.
Pratod, you also had a question? Pratod? I think Pratod's in the queue. While we're waiting for him to speak up, it might be the question he asked earlier, which is, does Pretotype work only for UI-based products?
No, it does not. So I will actually I'll get out of the Q&A here and go into something I had posted earlier right here. So in the example from Stanford, there are a couple of ones where they actually work with things that are non-digital, such as the Airbnb example, where if you're familiar with the history of how Airbnb got started, they had an air mattress and a simple breakfast for $80 a night. So they put an ad out for this to see if people would actually take this. And to their surprise, they did. They had 3 signups fairly quickly. They collected over 240 in their first night. And then they just kept on going with that, trying to find different places that they could rent out to people. So these Pretotypes, or testing the market to see if people would actually purchase something, has different examples here than this PDF. And if you want to, you could just do a quick search online for Alberto Savoia PDF, and anything that says quick reference in the title should point you to this particular PDF, and has plenty of physical examples like the mixed spaghetti, or the when Best Buy pitched a tent to basically advertise for a new service. There's plenty of physical examples of how Pretotypes have been used in the past.
Actually, that's also in line with the next question. Was that it's essentially like, how do we practice Pretotyping? This question comes from Pratod again. How do you practice Pretotyping? Obviously not on the job, but hands-on practice. So it might be great if you can share like different examples, or in your own experience of how you've done it.
Sure. So the first experiment I did, so I've committed to doing a Pretotype per month this year to get better familiarized with it. So for me, I just basically made it something where professionally I needed to kind of practice this in my own time. And the first one I did was because I knew, and this is actually something I presented on last month, was I kind of took stock of what I could do really well, which was web design, analytics, hosting, communication, and other things that I have experience in. And I created something called Miro Masters, because as Iva on the call it's actually, she was the inspiration for this, is that I was introducing people to different people, people that were interested in designers, and kind of just working with them on small projects that they needed to get done, so that it was done without any contracts. It wasn't done with any upfront agreements beyond, this is what we're going to do for this price. And I wanted to see if there was an actual market for this. So I created something in Webflow, and just basically did something that had some marketing copy on it, and you've taken some lessons from Jonathan Stark in terms of like value-based pricing. Kept it very, very simple. This took a half an hour to basically create. I know Typeform, so if anyone clicks on Get Started today, it would kind of pop this up in their interface to show, like, are you looking for a designer, or a mirror designer looking for work? And then from there, ask a particular point of questions and show how many questions were going to be in there, and then see what the response rate was going to be. So I was looking for actual physical email addresses as a kind of like the skin in the game for people that were interested. And funny enough, there was somebody from a competing company that actually signed up for it, said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this." So I was like, that's interesting. So Pratod, also for personally, I've seen people use this for kind of changing habits, so that if they exercise, if they do exercise at least 5 times a week, then that's their investment. Then they're going to hit this particular personal goal, and they use that as an hypothesis to see whether or not it's going to work. And they write down all their assumptions. The assumption is that I will get up every morning at 7 a.m. I will make sure that I keep with a particular, I'll keep my commitments and all those assumptions that go into it. I'll have enough free time. And then when it's all said and done, after the period's done, you can look back and say what assumptions were correct or incorrect, and how successful were you at keeping to that fitness regimen. So those would be the two examples I would say really quick that would kind of correspond to how you could practice prototyping. But really, it's taking stock of what you're intrinsically motivated by, and what you have the capacity to do. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that answered, and that also gave us a bit of I assume like it gave us a bit of inspiration as to how we can do it. Maybe a follow-up to that is, how do you, if it's super quantitative and how you're measuring, how do you almost isolate the different areas or different variables you're measuring for? And how do you ensure that the experiments are set up correctly against it?
If you're doing something of a transactional prototype, then you have the right it to kind of help you out in terms of understanding that most skin in the game has to deal with like a contract, the purchase of something like an actual money transaction, giving some personal information, or signing up for something like this. Like everyone here is kind of involved with a prototype in a way because they're actually spending their time in this session to learn about prototyping. So you can basically say, okay, you're spending the amount of time because it's your investment in this, but this is your skin in the game. So there's that measurement when it comes to transactional prototypes. Then you could also use that same metrics for those professional prototypes that I mentioned before, in terms of the amount of time you spend to either improve upon yourself or improve a situation. So they can be that those measurements can be used in different situations, but more often than not, it really depends on the type of engagement you're thinking about. In fact, down here in the try it yourself activity that we do later, this is something for professional goals and long-term aspirations. So by going through this activity, the idea is that you would use the same kind of hypothesis-driven kind of approach to outline some steps to kind of hit your professional goals. But I'm saving this till after the Q&A is done. But this essentially will get into how prototyping can work in a very personal and professional way, rather than just for products and services.
That's awesome. I think Pratod has another question.
Pratod,
we'd really love to hear your voice. So please feel free to take the stage. Pratod in. Huh? Okay, since this audio, I don't know whether it's an audio issue at the moment, but this question was, how do you avoid piggybacking your idea when we put prototype in front of customers? Because product going in production will take some time and people can piggyback on it. I hope you got that, Robert.
I think I'm understanding the question. I think, Pratod, you'll have to verify this too, but do you mean, how do you avoid starting one prototype when your existing prototype is already in play? Is that what you're talking about? I think that's what he means. If that is what he means, usually prototypes are not like bulky kind of engagements. They usually don't require a lot of time and effort. They're meant to be lightweight. So you have to skew by default to fast and cheap. Prototypes usually take less than 24 hours to build. They shouldn't take any longer than 48 at the most. You just want to get something simple in front of your audience to test it. So if you have, say, a prototype that you've already launched on Tuesday, let's say Tuesday morning, and you want to do another prototype, it shouldn't be a problem. It can be a variation on your existing one. For reference, I know of some people that run 10 prototypes a week, and most of them they're plugged into an analytics package, and they're variations, slight variations on the idea or the engagement concept on what people will do. And they use something like Google A/B testing or Google A/B switching. They use a number of tools to kind of see what may work. They try different locales. So more often than not, when you start really getting into prototyping, it's really easy to have a number of them running at the same time. Then you just take the data and you learn from what people do, and you take more of what people like and what well, not really like, but more of what people actually respond to, do more of that and less of the stuff that doesn't work. So hopefully that answered that question, if I understood it correctly.
Yep. There was also another clarification in it actually on perhaps it might be Pretotype meant competitors copying an idea you Pretotype. So how do you actually avoid those things from happening?
You can avoid it. If somebody's going to copy what you do, then that's probably a compliment in your favor. But if you're more often than not, your competitors, and I'm going to make some sweeping assumptions here, so I'm going to caveat this. Your competitors are probably too busy being competitive to really pay attention to what you're doing. The only time that people will start taking what you do and copying it is if they see that you're successful with it, or they want to take what they think works from it and make it their own. So I think that's unavoidable. We're just living in an age where people can basically do an image search and basically do things like I did, where we can take somebody else's photograph and put it into a digital form. So unless it's very sensitive IP, like if it's, I had one person privately ask me about the pretotyping challenge that's coming up and saying like, I have this idea that I don't want anybody to know about, then you just basically be very generic about how you're kind of communicating your testing kind of parameters, and don't give any particular ideas away, and just keep it very, very, very generic in a public sense. But that would be the best approach, is if you're really, really concerned about people stealing your ideas, just stay generic, but then you're testing privately. Make sure you do track those assumptions. You get a bit detailed on what you're after there. And then when the results come, you can be a bit more specific around the results, but not necessarily your product or your service or your approach. So hopefully that helps.
Okay. I'm also going to take my own comment. I'm wondering, no, but how do you? That's actually quite interesting. But at the same time, there are potentially risks as to doing or keeping it a bit generic. Although I do echo you there that there are sort of low risk ways to test these ideas out. Actually, a lot of comments coming in the or questions coming in the chat. But I'd love if people can sort of queue up and actually voice their questions out. I think Viola's up next. That's fine, Viola. Yep.
Hello.
There, perfect. Yeah. Is it also audio?
Hi, do you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep,
yeah, I was wondering, I got a question. So for a product that is not existing yet, and you have the points research and everything, is there another technique than creating a landing page and measuring the click-through rate and measuring a click-through rate for an online service? Are there other techniques that you can apply for prototyping?
Hang on one second. What's up?
Can I do service?
Not right away, bud. You got to do your Duolingo and your con first.
What? It's a weekend.
It's not even a weekend. It's a day out from school.
I know.
So go do your good Duolingo and con.
Not con. I don't have to do con on the holidays.
All right, fine. Do Duolingo, but you can't do service right away. It's way too early in the morning. You got to wait till 9 o'clock at least. Okay?
Fine. Do the other.
I love that intermission, Robert.
Okay. But you got to wait till I'm done, okay?
Okay.
All right. Sorry. No, he's considering his day off from school a holiday. So now that he has Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday off, because there was already Friday and Monday off, he's now considering Thursday an extended holiday. And the privilege asking is happening. So anyway, could you repeat your question, please?
Smart kid.
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sure. If you have really lovely, we have researched pain points, and now I was wondering, are there any other techniques for an online service that you can test with prototyping than creating a landing page in no code and measure the click-through rate and how people would react to certain ideas? Is there any other technique?
So the ones that I've seen have been like ads that you do on Facebook, YouTube pre-rolls. Sometimes they're Instagram ads. So if you want to take it from a completely you want to go completely the route of kind of seeing what people react to in terms of the messaging, you can go that route. It's a bit of a small investment on your part, depending on what your spread is and what your demographics are. But if you're versed in that, or if you know it very well, or if you want to learn it, that's one approach. Another that's trickier is using your existing networks and not asking for opinions, but putting out something that you've discovered, that this is something that you find interesting, but not necessarily looking to see if people like it. You just want to see if people react to it. I did this, and a couple of people have done this for people that are very community oriented, like I am. Like if I'm sending you invites on LinkedIn because you signed up for a meat butter mixer like this, I tend to be it kind of communicates I tend to be very community oriented, or at least network oriented. So when I'm putting something out for people to try out, I don't usually caveat or say that that I'm the person behind this. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I leverage community to say, okay, here's something that's new, like Miro Masters. There's another one that's coming up next month. It's the same way. And then I just scatter that across social just to see what the analytics look like and what people are interested in. More often than not, a webinar is a really good way of doing it too, where you can do an introduction to what you're talking about and not necessarily ask for the sell if they do attend, but to have the recording available. And then you can see, depending on what your skin in the game is, if they do email signups, if they actually do attend the webinar. Those are just as valid in terms of getting that validation, or they're just as valid as getting that data or that evidence that people are interested in what you're talking about. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Awesome. And then Amanda also had a question.
Hello, Amanda.
Amanda.
My question is, when is possible to identify it is a right moment to apply the prototyping in the product life cycle? Early stages, or like I want to upgrade a feature? Which methodology should I use?
Usually prototyping works very well at the very early stages before you even engage what the product is going to be or when you're going to start developing it. Essentially because it provides the necessary rationale to actually endeavor people, money, time into what you're going to be developing. If you have metrics that support your particular direction or strategic direction around what you're going to be developing, that usually moves the needle with a lot of people that have to give approvals. I won't go into too many examples of this, but I've seen one successful prototype have 3 different tests of different success rates, but in different modes. And usually when people see the proper metrics that correspond to engagement, to signups, to inferring to the revenue that may come in from something, usually it fast forwards a conversation in terms of approvals pretty fast. In terms of feature sets, more often than not, and this happened back in January with a client, once they understood how prototyping worked and how they could deploy it for their own purposes, sales and marketing literally took that and said, oh, well, we already have the mechanisms to do this with Salesforce and others in other processes or other tools. We're going to go ahead and start setting up experiments to see for this new service that we're rolling out in February, what messaging and what people would react to for signups and what really appeals to them. So they actually started their own multivariate testing based on some of their hypotheses that they had created and the assumptions that went around those. And they were off and running before I even got to like day 2 or day 3. So to answer your question, you probably, for a product development lifecycle, the earlier the better, much earlier to kind of validate why you're doing the product in the first place. And this, for feature sets and for kind of adding to what's existing product, the best thing is to kind of use your existing tools to see where people could engage and potentially upsell to that particular audience around what they may want. Does that help, Amanda? I assume it does.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, in Meet Butter, since I'm sharing my screen, I only see 8 screens. So unless the person that's talking comes to the top, I just kind of go, okay. I do see Alexandra there, who I have not seen in quite a long time. So hi, Alexandra. How are you? Okay. Who else has got a question?
Hello, back. Maybe perhaps you can actually like switch over to or end the screen share so you can see more of the faces if that helps.
That's a good idea.
And I'd love if people can really use the queue, that would be amazing. I know there are a lot of people sharing questions more on the chat. Hey, someone did. Oh, no, I heard differently. I think
it
the
was
next
just
question
me.
was from. Oh, okay. Sorry. The next question was from Rob. Rob, you're there? Rob? Okay. On behalf of Rob, so Rob from Leap, who actually spoke the last time for our ButterMixer, he's asking how do you explain the fundamental differences between a regular prototype that is design sprint-driven prototype completed in hours and a Pretotype? This is something you touched on earlier, but perhaps you can re-explain it again if that helps.
So a prototype, in a design sprint, usually involves getting something believable in front of your target audience and getting their opinions on what they think about what you've done, and infer either explicitly or inexplicitly, will they do certain tasks or complete certain functions related to your long-term goal and sprint questions. So it's more opinion-based. With Pretotyping, you are not seeking opinions. You don't want to know what people think. You just want to know what they're going to do. You want to know if they are going to actually either purchase or they're not going to say purchase, but they're going to give you some sort of skin in the game, whether it's an email address, their time, some sort of money, something that's an intentional transaction to show, or a transaction to show intent, I should say. So those are the main differences between the two. I will say that you can do prototyping in a design sprint, and it takes about 24 to 48 hours. So it could be very, very similar to what a Pretotype does in terms of the build. And you do want to kind of target that Goldilocks effect with both situations. But the main difference between the two is that at the end of a design sprint, you have a whole bunch of collection of data that's opinion-based around what people may or may not do. At the end of a Pretotype, you know for certain if your audience is actually going to do what you intend for them to do in the market to the best of your ability, to the best that you can execute. And I find there's more value in the Pretotyping side of things, because you're eventually going to go to the market with what you're going to be doing with a prototype and a design sprint anyway. This kind of gets straight to the meat of the matter and essentially figures out if it's going to work or not. So I would say that those are the two main, that's the main difference between those two scenarios.
Super valid. But how, just a quick follow-up, how as well how do you validate if the quantitative data that you get from these prototyping exercises is valid or not? Or how do you sort of set up the right metrics to track?
So it usually involves the XYZ hypothesis that's covered in the book that Alberto writes about, where after you kind of think of the engagement model that you're going to have with your idea, you basically write it in a very simple way. It's X is the percentage of people that in your audience that are going to engage. Y is the audience, and Z is what you expect them to do. So 10% of school administrators will sign up for a design thinking course is one. But then if you want to refine it to what we call hypo-zooming, instead of using school administrators, you get more specific, and you want to do a dynamic called distance to data, whereas you can get it's very, very close to your audience, like how close you can get your audience. So for me, if it's school administrators and design thinking, I have a school that's literally like 2 blocks in this direction from my house. So I could say school administrators at La Valita Elementary. So I'm very specific about who I'm going to be targeting. Will basically, what will they do? They'll pay $99 for a design thinking course in June. So if I get more specific, then I can also derive better assumptions around what I think is going to happen. Like I'm assuming that administrators are going to engage this type of learning at this point in the school year, because they may do their planning for 2022 right now, rather than 2021, whereas they're already in the middle of their process. But that's an example of it, is that you use the XYZ hypothesis model to fashion out what percentage of your audience is going to engage. And then if it hits that percentage or goes above it, then usually you can connotate in quotes, success if it goes above and beyond a certain percentage. If it just hits the percentage, then you have some assumptions that worked and didn't work. But the XYZ usually is the thing that provides the foundation for everything.
That's super. That perfectly answered my question. Thank you. Actually, in the interest of time, I know we blocked most people's schedule for 1 hour. So, but if you guys want, Robert actually told us earlier that he can extend the Q&A if you guys have any more questions. So, and anything anyone wants to ask?
Yeah, I think Abel Monagas,
Yep.
for sure, who I haven't seen in a long time. Hello there, sir. You're looking dandy.
Thanks, Robert. You look great as well.
Oh, well, thank you.
As
I really
always.
made a good effort this morning to make sure I was looking good. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question was, how do you determine the sort of level of action that you want from your customers? So a specific example is, say I want to sell a phone that I'm still planning. So I want to decide if I want to sell this, right? How do I decide? Do I get just pre-order sign-ups for an email, or pre-orders already, like if they could pay partial for the product itself? How do you decide on that?
It's going to depend on how you feel morally about taking money when you don't have a product. Some people don't like the idea of doing that. Others have no qualms about it whatsoever. So you can go in both directions. You can put something up where you're advertising for a new type of phone, and you say it's $129. It's not in production yet, but if you'd like to pre-purchase, you can go through the buy flow process here. And if there's a number, say like 6 or 7 people say, sure, I'll buy the phone, but you have no product line, you have no investors, you have nothing, not even a designer, not even like a UI person to basically create it, then you can go back after your prototype is done and say, here's a refund for your money. You could also offer them like a small gift card if you want to kind of say, for your troubles, here's a gift card, to say we decided we're going to go in a different direction. I did this with Bonobo, which was a online learning course that I created in the last Global Virtual Design Sprint, 2 of them ago. And I refunded everyone's money and just basically told them and sent them an email saying, we're gonna go in a different direction. And I didn't receive any emails otherwise. They were just happy to get their money back. But I know that in that particular instance, it was 6 people. 6 people signed up an email and 2 paid. And our goal was on the email signups, but not necessarily the paid ones. But if you are interested in finding out if people will actually pay, then you could do that, refund their money, apologize, or say like, we're not going in that direction. We're in beta. We're going to try something different. And then that's that. And then you have the data to go by. But if you didn't want to take their money and just want to have them sign up, then just email's fine. Then you can get updates on the progress of my particular Abel Manangas phone, the AB phone, as I'll call, or the AM phone that only works in the morning. And then you can get updates for that. And I'll send those out at 6 a.m., obviously, if you want to keep with the whole morning thing. But that's probably how it would play out, is that you would set up something to potentially ask for money, but then immediately turn around and say, that we're not going to be building this. Here's your money back. Sorry about that. Thank you for your interest. And then you take away from that you can even ask a follow-up survey if you want after you send the thing out, and don't ask for opinions, but ask what prompted you to purchase this phone. So you can get some contextual understanding of what the decision was, and that may influence how you kind of approach your next build or your next iteration in your prototype.
Okay. Yep.
Does that help, Abel?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Robert.
No problem. Good to see you.
Great to see you, Robert. Thanks, Jessica.
Okay, thanks, Abel and Tori. I was also typing in the chat for Alexandra and Pretotype who were having audio connection problems. Let me check on you guys with you guys after, just to isolate the issue. Any other questions, guys? You might have, or experiences to share, because I was seeing in the chat that there's a lot of people who also have experience in prototyping, or there seems to be some. So if you guys have any other call outs that you'd want to add on top of Robert's take on it, that would be amazing. Anyone else? Huh? Okay. I'll take the slightly awkward silence as a no one wants to share.
Although Pratotype did ask about restaurants or movies, like it's
Okay.
A prototype is similar to what's shown in the Founder movie, where they prototype the kitchen layout, sketch on a tennis court, and orchestrate what real people work in the kitchen. So I've seen those scenarios also with Hilton. Hilton did an entire lobby made out of cardboard, and they had people walk through the whole thing. So that could be considered a prototype. I think that's more of I would say that's more of a grand experiment in terms of the experience that people go through. But yeah, it could be considered a form of a prototype. Anything that's pretend and that comes before the actual build, then it kind of follows that model. But yeah, I think that would probably go into it for sure. Although the kitchen layout sketch on a tennis court is interesting. It's like a pop-up kitchen and where that would go. And somebody also asked about sharing the mural thing. So Cheska, how do you want to play this? Should I, at this point, since we're at 40 after the hour, and I already said way in advance that I'm fine with sticking around up until the top of the hour. We could go through this exercise, or we could just basically leave it in the mural for people to try on their own if they want to. And I'll just can basically share out the link, and it's going to be editable, so people can go ahead and do it if they want.
It would be amazing if you can share it in chat. And then for everyone else, I'll also send across the link to our recording into Robert's mural, so at least you can play around with it after. I'll share it via email for everyone.
Okay. So should I just go ahead and put it in the chat then?
Yeah. For people who are here, at least they can access it.
That should bring you over to it. So that's going to be the presentation. It'll be all the links and the resources. The editable parts are going to be down below in the try it yourself section for the professional goals and aspirations. Those have examples of how they can be done. You can engage it if you want. I think I could go through the exercise really fast just so you understand what was intended by this. And what I'll do is I'll share my screen again real fast, Cheska, and then I'll basically go through how this works, if that would help.
Yep. Sounds good.
Okay. Give me a second. I'll go back into the Butter. I will go ahead and present with a bad accent and share the screen. Let's see here. Back to the Chrome tab of the mural. All right. So the way this works is you're going to start with putting your professional goals for 2021. So they can be of a wide variety. And there were enough digital cards here for people to try these on in case we were going to do it as a group. In order to put your particular professional development goal in, you just double click on a card, and then it'll give you editing access to that particular card with the link that you have. And you usually don't want to be too generic or too specific. You kind of want to, for answers for these, you just want to get it so that has enough information to go by. Then after you put in your professional goals, you want to think of your long-term aspirations in terms of if you complete your professional goal, what aspiration does it kind of correspond to for like the 3 to 5 year outlook for you professionally. Now, these particular icons over here, just so that we're not mistaken, the intent was these are not small little poop emojis. These are called cairns. Now, if you've ever been on a trail in a mountain or been on hiking, usually you'll encounter these because these are meant to kind of give you a visual cue as to where a trail is, especially if it's been snowing or you can't really see your way. Cairns are an effective way when you hike to understand where the actual trail is so you can follow it and not go off trail and get lost. But the idea for this particular exercise was if you saw something that somebody was doing in the professional goal setting over here, you could basically drag and drop a cairn over there and saying, yeah, this is something that I also want to aspire to as well. So it's a visual cue on how to basically do that. If you do this with a group environment, if you happen to copy this and do it on your own, this is pretty effective in getting some group consensus around particular things in the exercise that people like. So professional goals, say if I'm Iva and I want to do a particular goal of, getting more clients this year, maybe there's a couple other people on the call that are also interested in this, and they put a card over there. And it's a visual way of showing kind of some affinity for particular things. Once you have your goals and your aspirations down, you head on over to how will you embrace these professional goals. And this is taking a variation on the market engagement hypothesis and calls it a personal engagement hypothesis. And it's fashioned in such a way so that after you kind of mark down the goals and long-term aspirations you have, you follow this format that goes, in order for me to achieve this aspirational achievement, I will invest this amount of time, money, or both to show my skin in the game, to do this action that gets me closer to my professional goal in order to achieve this professional goal. So in his example over here, it says, in order for me to become a better cartoon character illustrator for my presentations, not mentioning some things I've done previously, I'm going to spend an hour each weekday during the week to practice drawing and illustrating human and cartoon figures in order to achieve my goal of being a better artist. So this could correspond to something that I'm actively doing right now. And if you want to do your own kind of one, all you have to do is just double click on one of these boxes here, and they'll start the editing process on how you would actually write out that engagement hypothesis. Yeah, that's a good idea. Somebody mentioned I should probably summon everyone to see what I'm doing so that you're not kind of wandering around. Then after you write out that kind of general or fuzzy kind of engagement that you have, you're going to start putting it to a market engagement, or sorry, an XYZ hypothesis. So that it's written out here, and it gives you some examples on the left of different XYZ hypotheses you can go with. Some of these come directly from the book, but the example I give here just basically copies and pastes what I had done in the previous step about becoming a better illustrator, and puts it in sort of a kind of a hybrid of the XYZ. So I put a when and a where here. So in the first 3 months of 2021, 25% of my available time each week will be reserved for drawing and illustrating human and cartoon figures. And the why is the long-term aspiration. You may have multiple ones, but which one kind of corresponds to it? And you can put all of that in as a test to see what you would do for the amount of time that you have. And then finally, for the PE, as I would call it, you basically mark down your goal, and you give yourself a deadline, and you write down the required steps you would need to kind of prepare yourself to achieve that particular goal that you've outlined in your WXYZ in this case. So this rather than going through this exercise, this is something you can do on your own that corresponds directly to Pretotyping, but it's done in a professional way so that you're kind of going after your professional goals more than you are going after a product or service in the market. So that's an example of the variation I had alluded to previously of how you can use this technique for other purposes besides intentional commerce, or intentional with trying to get a sale or to acquire customers or revenue. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's actually like a really great way. I think many people from here might be trying that exercise. It's an interesting way to sort of view the personal goals and how it aligns to professional. It's super awesome.
Cheska, what we could do is, just out of curiosity, we could get an emoji check from everybody in the call to say if people are interested in kind of trying it out, they can give a thumbs up. So if
I
we
love
see
the
a sea of thumbs
Pretotyping
up,
in accent.
right? If they have time to do it, if they want to do it, they can put a thumbs up in the meat butter, and then we can do a lightning round of this, and then people can do it at their own pace, even if the call ends. So, if not,
I saw 5 people actually doing it. If I got my count right, or 6 now. Thank you, Andrea, for sharing that. A bit of a later action, but still there. So yeah, there's 6, I think I saw.
Okay. So why don't we do a lightning round of this? We'll see where it goes, and then we'll leave about 5 minutes left at the top of the hour for any last minute questions. So at least people can get some value out of this session rather than just having me be a talking head telling them everything about Pretotyping, which I know is only go so far with some folks. So if you are in the mural, I'm going to summon you over to the professional goals section. I'll go ahead and summon everyone so you're kind of looking at what I'm looking at. If you'd like to go ahead and put in some of your professional goals that you set for yourself in 2021, all you have to do is just double click on a card to start. I will give, let's see, until we can allocate enough time. I'll give 2 minutes for this, just so that you have a little bit of time to think about it. And when everything is done, I'll set off it should automatically Mural set off the timer. So you don't have to be you don't have to disclose a whole lot about your professional goals. In fact, people won't know who you are. But go ahead and put those in as an example, and we'll see how this goes. And we'll take it from there.
Okay, cool. And for people who, because some of the people have been leaving the call already. Thank you so much for joining, guys. For anyone else who needs to leave, we understand we're running quite off time. So we just want to say thank you. And we hope to see you in the next Meet Butter. And we hope this was super valuable for you. And thank you, Robert, for your time. Super amazing to have you on.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming around and checking this out. And if you do have other things you need to get to, then please do. I wouldn't want to necessarily take you away from other obligations you have.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, as people are already doing, if you see some things that other people are kind of writing out that you also have an affinity for, then that's what those cards are for. You just kind of drag them and put them over onto those particular boxes. And if you want to work in advance, once you get done with your professional goals or what you stated them, think about what you've written in particular, some particular goals that speak to a long-term play for yourself, and go ahead and on the long-term aspiration side, go ahead and write out what those long-term aspirations are that correspond to those goals, but only when you're ready. And Jessica, what I think I'll do is I'll end it at stage 3 or step 3, so that we don't go too far into the weeds with the other stuff, so that people on their own time can kind of write out their engagement hypothesis in their own time.
That's good.
You are now free to move about the country. You know, there's such a thing as serious face, like Zoom or not Zoom, but like a video serious face that everyone has when they're concentrating and working on the screen, where they forget that their camera's working, so that there's like the engagement when you're talking to people, but then there's what people do how people look when they're normally looking when they're concentrating on their screen. I don't know. It's a dynamic I see all the time.
What's the different face you want to show us how that looks?
No, I'm doing it right now.
I think I have a standard face.
I'm looking in the corners. I'm looking here. I'm looking past my camera. I think it would be a good way of putting it. Okay. Give about another minute for the aspirational goals. So you got plenty of time. You're good. Because we're not going to be doing the whole thing. We're just going to get you started with these two. And then we'll kind of engage the next one. By the way, if questions or comments do come up, continue to put those in the chat if you're still here. And we can kind of see what those are like when we're wrapping things up at the top of the hour. If you are done with your professional goals and your long-term aspirations, you think you've kind of reflected on those and have some things in there that work, or you've seen what somebody else has put in there, you can go ahead and claim one of the boxes in the personal engagement hypothesis. Look at the format that's there. Just double-click on one of the boxes for the text. Click again to just get the cursor, and then that way you can keep the format in terms of in order for me to, I will, to do those sorts of things, and just fill in the answers that correspond to those goals and aspirations that you outlined. And that's the takeaway that you can kind of work from there. If you want to put down your 2021 goals and your long-term aspirations in those particular cards to the left for reference, feel free to do so. But if you'd like, as a kind of a follow-up or as like a post Meet ButterMixer kind of artifact, is that if you want to, on social, put up your personal engagement hypothesis as a way of showing that you kind of we're at the session, and that you have something that you took away from it that you could potentially use as a professional experiment for yourself. So there's that. And then the other steps that are listed here in the mural, you have access to them. Feel free to use them if you'd like. If you have any questions on how to do either steps 4 or 5 and how to navigate those, you're free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I can go into the mural and I can make a Loom video to kind of outline how to go through each step. That's really easy to do, and I don't mind to do it. So again, if on your own you get a bit stuck on how to do some of the steps procedurally, just reach out and let me know.
I think it would be awesome if you're doing that Loom anyhow. It would be awesome to share to everyone who was in the call earlier, just in case they're also keen to do the exercise in their own time.
Yep, I think I might.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So, Cheska, what's our status? We have 5 minutes left, I think, at the top of the hour, so we close the doors on everything. So how would you, what's the procedure in terms of kind of going forward?
I think for this, we'll actually, as I mentioned earlier, we'll make the recording available to everyone, and I'd love to share your mural link plus the instructional Loom to everyone, and actually continue the conversation after this ButterMixer. And like, as you guys know, this is a fortnightly event we're having, so we'd love to see all of you guys in the next ButterMixer as well. And if you have any topics that you'd want to discuss or things that you'd be keen to know more about, or even join us as a speaker, just feel free to connect with me over email or on LinkedIn. And obviously, if you have any questions to Robert, I'm assuming most of you have, or many of you have him on LinkedIn as well. So Robert, if you're free to take questions there as well, that would be awesome. Okay, cool. Does anyone else have anything to share before we end? Nah? Anything from you, Robert? Thank you so much again for making the time. We love how we can tap on you for anything. Yeah.
Not a problem. If they're like your Cheska saying, if you do have any questions, any follow up at all, LinkedIn's the best way to get a hold of me. I'm usually on that all the time. I won't do any like shameless promotion. Just look me up, and I'm usually have enough to kind of link to this to understand what the GVDS is all about, what I'm doing with Pretotyping. So just look me up, engage me, ask questions, or just start a conversation, and we can go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. And same thing for everyone. If you guys have any questions about Meat Butter, feel free to let us know on LinkedIn. I'm also there. Thank you so much. It was great seeing both new and old faces. See you around for the next one, guys. Bye.
Shout out to Iva, Alexandria, Sylvain, and Abel, and everybody else I can see that's on there. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out. Take care. Stay healthy.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.